Hi, it's Mrs. Blanchard here again with our next series of lectures, this time focusing on Chapter 19. If you're doing these in advance, you might notice that we've skipped two sections of lecture on artwork and Frederick Jackson Turner's Frontier Thesis and the Closing of the Frontier, because we could do those in class. But we are still continuing on with the Gilded Age period. So just remember, you have your guiding questions from the College Board. We'll talk more about these in class. So very quickly, the impact of the Civil War. We have the continuation of several trends we addressed at the beginning of the last unit as well. And in this chapter, we're really going to be looking at the first and second ones on the railroad and the second industrial revolution and the growth of a national market of economy. We've seen this slide as well, and I'm not going to put up the PowerPoints again, but really think about how things like the Pacific Railroad Act, the Morrill Tariff, and the Legal Tender Act and National Banking Act are going to help support business and industrialization during this time period. So we have three regions of the country part of this national market economy. We'll talk more about the South. We've already talked about Reconstruction last year, though. And for New England, we're talking about the izations: industrialization, urbanization, and immigration. All three are fueling each other and feeding off of each other. And we've already talked about the West with ranching, mining, farming, and Native Americans. So the North. The North is experiencing a second industrial revolution, mass immigration, as well as increased urbanization. All of these we talked about in context of the first industrial revolution, the old immigrants, the building up of urban areas around the mills in Massachusetts like Lowell and around New York City, as well as industrialization. So think about what the first industrial revolution was, part of the triple revolution: transportation revolution, the market revolution as well. And now we're going to compare it generally to the second industrial revolution. The second industrial revolution, however, is going to be built on railroads, steel, and oil. Those are the three main raw materials, unlike the cotton of the first industrial revolution. And they're going to form America's first monopolies, large companies that monopolize or control almost singularly one industry. A look at some numbers shows how fast the American economy is growing. At the end of the Civil War, we're the fourth largest economy, and if you account for our population size and land mass, per capita we were more like 18th. By 1900, the turn of the century, we're number one, undisputedly number one. We also have the world's biggest navy, and it's because the American economy is growing at a rate of 4% a year, which is about what, in contemporary terms, China and some of the Asian tiger economies have grown at. Why is all this growth developing? Because of our strong natural resources, especially in timber, coal, oil, and other metal ores that we are getting through all of the mining in the West, as well as the growth of cities, which fuel our factories, and all of this is part of the Gilded Age. So we need an understanding of what laissez-faire means. It's French for let it be. Faire is to be, to do, to make. So it's often thought of a hands-off approach. Adam Smith, after the American Revolution in 1776, had taken a look at the tempest over taxation under mercantilism and the Navigation Acts, and he develops this new theory that's published in The Wealth of Nations at the same time we are writing America's Constitution, that says that it should be the invisible hand of the market forces that should guide business, not government regulation. Unfortunately, this is going to be a balancing act, because without government regulation, you're going to have the rise of monopolies with no police force to prevent unfair business practices. So you have to think about a lot of the things we're going to talk about and ask, is America a laissez-faire economy in the 19th century? So the second industrial revolution is going to be fueled by coal, steel, and oil. And if you look at the big three monopolies, these are the big three monopolies. If you think about railroads, railroads need all three of these to survive, and they are the cornerstone of the economy. The second industrial revolution, though, is really as a byproduct of using industrial efficiency, increasing industrial production. These machines, steel machines, lubricated with oil and fueled by coal, are going to be incorporated into the first assembly lines long before Henry Ford was ever around. And you'll start to see continuous production, faster production of goods. It begins in the meatpacking industry, bringing in the cattle from the West, and others spreads to other industries. Coal is allowing for continuous machine production, and we're going to see a shift from water fuel to coal fuel because coal also provides stronger power to the machines. And so the second industrial revolution in principle is based off of the application of new technology to increase labor and the volume of goods. And a lot of this comes from a book published by Frederick Winslow Taylor and becomes known as the efficiency movement. Taylor himself is like an efficiency expert and teaches corporate and business managers how to get more production without increasing their workforce and therefore increasing expenses. So some of these inventions, we saw a lot of them in the summer reading. We've already talked about the telegraph cable of Cyrus Fields. We talked about it last year. And you see business typewriters, an early prototype here on the left-hand side. Cash registers and adding machines mean that you no longer need professionals that can do complicated adding to run adding machines and typewriters and registers. You can now farm it out to less educated people. High-speed textile spindles are going to improve from the first industrial revolution. In the book this summer, we saw George Eastman's Kodak camera was present at the World's Fair. People needed the license to purchase it or to take pictures. And even Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. And I hesitate to even call it that because those of you who are in Italian, especially if you have Miss Bozzarelli, will tell me it was actually invented by an Italian and stolen by Bell. While I don't dispute that, he's the one who holds the trademark here in the United States, so that's what I'm going to call it. And the success of the telephone, maybe more than the telephone, Bell gave us a successful telephone company. And Bell Telephone becomes so successful they eventually have to be broken up as a monopoly. And by 1905, there are 10 million telephones in Americans' home, where 20 years before there had been none because it had not been invented yet. So in addition to Bell, Edison also, I hate to break it to you, stole a lot of his inventions. Or stole may be a strong word, but he had an invention lab where lots of younger men and inventors worked under him, and then Edison patented and then therefore took credit and got the profit of their ideas. Edison's illuminating company is going to use direct current and install the first electrical lights in 1882, and we'll watch a short video of New York City being lit up in class. Tesla invents something called alternating current, allows electricity to travel over longer distances to power streetcars and factories. In homes, Edison is going to win out, mainly through some nefarious business practices. Over time, however, Tesla's alternating current really does prove superior. By 1900, Americans had produced over 4,000 cars, all before Henry Ford had started his plant. And in 1903, the Wright brothers pioneered the airplane flight, but there certainly had been people flying before. So this is an age of invention, and perhaps somewhat cynically, an age of stealing others' credit. Why? Because of our vast natural resources. We have so much coal, steel, and oil, coal and steel, especially in New England, that we're going to be able to produce these goods. Carnegie Steel is going to become one of the biggest corporations in the United States and in the world. Steel is going to become important because it allows for taller buildings. You saw Root and Sullivan talking about this in the summer reading. Longer bridges like the Brooklyn Bridge that's constructed in the 1880s, stronger railroad lines, and heavier machinery. Carnegie Steel later becomes known as U.S. Steel, and that company alone makes more steel than all of England. He converts his steel plants to the Bessemer process, which force blasts of cold air into the high heat furnaces, therefore making a stronger and therefore far superior product. He's able to outproduce his competition and offer lower prices, all while giving a superior product, and Carnegie Steel takes over steel production in the United States. And although you don't know what this means, you will soon enough, I want you to write down vertical integration. Vertical integration. Carnegie is a Scotsman. He's an immigrant to the United States and becomes an example perhaps even the icon of the American dream and the social mobility possible in the United States. He writes the Gospel of Wealth, which we'll read in class, and it allows him and other robber barons, especially Christian and pious robber barons, to excuse a lot of their actions and excuse the growing disparity between rich and poor in the United States. The steel production is so high, here's a graph of it, that you see the United States actually produced more steel than all of Europe, not just England. But what's even more shocking is the growth that we see in this time period from 1880 to 1914, having about 6 to 8 times growth in less than 40 years. This is because the United States is ideal for steel production because the coal can fuel the steel furnaces, the iron is the raw materials, and our railroad infrastructure will provide a means for distributing steel out throughout the country. With Carnegie, you also have John D. Rockefeller, who's going to monopolize the oil industry. Oil is becoming more and more important because new industrial machines need kerosene for lighting in the factories, as well as for home use, but also industrial lubricants to lubricate the steel and iron machines. Rockefeller is going to streamline processes to lower oil costs and improve the quality of oil, so much so that by 1879, Standard Oil rules 90% of U.S. oil and sells to Africa, Asia, and South America. And again, I want you to write down now horizontal integration. Carnegie was vertical. Rockefeller is going to be horizontal integration. And Rockefeller gets a somewhat unfair charge that he is a monopoly monster. Standard Oil, especially because of some of the business practices it uses to build up its monopoly, becomes attacked and really made famous by Frank Norris in a book called The Octopus, in which the Standard Oil octopus consumes Congress, the White House, and even the judiciary. All of this is made possible and fuels, pardon the pun, railroads, because in 1862 Congress had passed the Pacific Railroad Act authorizing the Transcontinental Railroad. Irish workers in the east built towards the west, making up the Union Pacific Railroad, and Chinese workers in the west started in California and worked their way east as part of the Central Pacific Railroad. And they met in May of 1869, 2 years ahead of schedule, at Promontory Point in Utah, and laid the Golden Spike, completing the Transcontinental Railroad. This sparked a railroad boom in the United States, which therefore sparked similar booms in steel, coal, and oil necessary to work the railroads. And so we've seen this part of the graph before. There's not a lot of railroads before the Civil War, but after the Civil War there is an explosion, especially in the 1880s to the 1890s. This is where most of the rapid growth occurs. Railroads lead to the creation of time zones in the United States, first used in 1870 exclusively by railroad companies to help regulate the railroad schedules. The United States will adopt it during World War I because it needs the improved regulation. Very quickly here at the end, the problems of growth leads to a lot of overbuilding, over-speculation, and leads to two massive panics, one in 1873 and one in 1893. And pooling and consolidation that's orchestrated mainly by J.P. Morgan is going to fail to stop over-speculation. And speculators like Jay Gould, who earns the nickname the most hated man in the world, bought rail lines to profit with little concern for efficient use. And so by the 1890s, we're going to have a complicated system of overlapping networks and railroad lines that really leads to a lot of inefficiency in the railroads. Despite this, railroads still become the first big industry, building up the first monopolies by consolidating smaller railroad companies into a few large railroad companies, and eventually you'll see 4 great trunk lines into the west that we saw a map of the other day. So you have a lot of intersecting railroad lines in the United States, and it's really going to be Cornelius Vanderbilt who becomes the most powerful figure in the railroad industry as owner of the New York Railroad. So in conclusion, you have massive corporations are increasingly replacing small family businesses, and new technology, transportation, and marketing leads to a lot more efficient production, but also problems with labor regulation. And by 1900, all of this has really helped to make us the most industrialized and richest country in the world. So much so that by 1900, the U.S. accounted for a third of the entire world's industrial production. Okay, we're going to leave off there. We're going to pick up with industrialization and more about business next time, explain to you what horizontal and vertical integration exactly means, and I'll see you there.